Thomas hadn't left the lighthouse in 3 months, not since the incident with the supply boat that never arrived. The winter storms had been particularly brutal this year, turning the normally challenging job of lighthouse keeping into a test of survival and sanity. He'd grown used to the constant howling of the wind, the endless crash of waves against the rocky shore below, but tonight was different. Tonight, the storm seemed alive, almost conscious in its fury. Thomas sat in his chair by the kerosene lamp, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of long cold tea. The lighthouse beam swept across the angry sea in its eternal rotation, casting strange shadows that danced across his small living quarters. 8:42 p.m, according to his pocket watch, still 4 more hours until his next trip up to check the light. That's when he heard it. A woman's scream, distant but clear, cutting through the storm like a knife through butter. Thomas froze, his cup halfway to his lips. In 30 years of lighthouse keeping, he'd heard many things. The wails of seabirds that sometimes sounded human, the peculiar groaning of ice forming on the rocks, even the haunting songs of whales in the deep. But this was different. The scream came again, closer this time. Then silence, broken only by the storm. Tap! The sound was so soft he almost missed it. A gentle tap against his window, like a bird hitting the glass. But his windows were 60 feet above the rocks. Tap, tap. Thomas stood slowly, his joints creaking like old wood. The tapping continued, gentle but insistent. As he approached the window, the kerosene lamp flickered, casting wild shadows across the room. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw nothing but darkness. The beam from the lighthouse swept past, illuminating the window for a brief moment, and in that flash of light, Thomas saw something that made his blood run cold. A pale handprint on the glass, slowly dripping away in the rain. His heart pounding, Thomas heard another sound. 3 soft knocks on his heavy wooden door. He didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at him to run up to the light room and bar the door. But what if someone was truly in danger? What if a boat had wrecked on the rocks? His trembling hand reached for the door handle. The brass felt ice cold against his skin. As he pulled the door open, the wind howled into the room, extinguishing his lamp. In the darkness, Thomas saw a figure silhouetted against the night sky. A woman in a dripping wet dress, her face hidden by long dark hair. Thank goodness, Thomas breathed, relieved to find a survivor rather than his imagined horrors. Please, come in from the storm. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, water pooling at her feet. That's when Thomas noticed something at her feet. A glass of milk in an antique glass, the kind his mother used to serve him from when he was a child. The same glass that had been packed away in his childhood home when she died 50 years ago. How did you... he began. The woman slowly raised her head, hair parting to reveal her face. Thomas stumbled backward, a scream caught in his throat. The face looking back at him was his mother's, exactly as she had looked the day she died, but with black, empty eye sockets that seemed to swallow what little light remained. "You didn't drink your milk, Thomas," the thing wearing his mother's face said in a voice like grinding bones. "You never finished your milk that night, but now you will." The lighthouse beam swept past one final time, illuminating the scene for a brief moment. The thing that wasn't his mother lunging forward, countless dark hands reaching out from beneath her dress, the glass of milk floating in the air, and Thomas's final scream being swallowed by the storm. As Thomas's scream dissolved into the roar of the storm, he found himself choking on the thick, sour taste of milk filling his mouth, spilling over his lips as if forced by unseen hands. He gagged, stumbling backward, but the sensation persisted, relentless and overpowering. The figure of his mother began to multiply, shifting grotesquely with each rotation of the lighthouse beam. She was everywhere, lining the walls, standing at the edges of his vision, all staring with hollow black sockets, milk dripping from their mouths. He clutched his throat, gasping, but his hands passed through his own skin as if he were nothing but a ghost himself. Panicked, he scrambled up the spiraling staircase toward the light, needing its warmth and familiarity. With every step, the walls seemed to close in, and the figures grew closer, their whispers filling his ears. "Finish your milk, Thomas. Finish your milk." Finally reaching the top, he threw open the door to the light room. But the light was extinguished, replaced by an icy darkness thick enough to suffocate. In the middle of the room, a small child's chair stood facing him. A glass of milk sat on it, full to the brim, untouched. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest, his mind scrambling for sanity, for clarity, but nothing made sense. Then he noticed it, the small wet footprints leading from the little child's chair to his feet. A sharp, childlike giggle filled the room, and from the shadows around him emerged a swarm of small, half-seen figures crawling toward him on all fours, leaving trails of black milk. The creatures, small and twisted, each had the face of his mother, distorted and frozen in a sinister smile. Panicked, Thomas tried to run, but his feet sank into the floor like it was swallowing him, trapping him. He struggled, but it was no use. The glass of milk that initially sat on the child's chair in the middle of the room floated toward him. It was now being forced to his lips by unseen hands. As the sour liquid filled his mouth, he felt an icy shock in his veins. His vision began to blur, the walls of the lighthouse spinning until he could see only darkness. When Thomas opened his eyes, he was no longer in the lighthouse. He was standing alone in the middle of a dark, endless sea, with only a faint light from the lighthouse far in the distance. But something felt wrong. The light was broken and flickering, and it seemed to be pulling him toward it. He looked down and saw his own body was pale and drained, with the same dark liquid dripping from him that he had seen on the floor earlier. Thomas realized too late that he was now part of the darkness. He was the new ghost in the lighthouse, doomed to wait for the next soul to stumble upon the light, just as he had.